Of all the religious themes we avoid today, sin is most likely the most disdained. Why? The fear of confronting our sin. There once was a preacher who was asked to do a gospel meeting in Kentucky. So he was preparing, and he asked what the topic was on, and they said sin. So he prepared, and he went for his first night. On his first night, he spoke on gambling. He thought he spoke a good lesson, spoke on the sin of gambling. And after the lesson, he walked to the back of the auditorium, and one of the elders got up. They walked back to him, and they said, "Preacher, you can't speak on gambling. You're in Kentucky." The preacher was a little confused. He asked, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, a third of our members grow thoroughbred horses." He was a little confused, but he didn't take much notice. So the second night, he spoke on alcohol. So he spoke a good lesson on alcohol, and he was walking to the back of the auditorium after. The same elder got up, ran over there, and he, "The preacher, can't speak on alcohol. You're in Kentucky." The preacher, a little stunned at this point, asked him why again. He said, "Well, a third of our members work in the distillery." So the preacher, a little baffled, decided he'd preach on a different topic. So he preached on tobacco the third night. And after he walked to the back of the auditorium, and the same elder got up to him and said, "Preacher, can't speak on tobacco." The preacher was a little frustrated at this point. And he asked him why, and he's like, "Well, a third of our members grow tobacco." So the preacher was very upset, and he said, "Well, what do you want me to preach on? Can't preach on alcohol. Can't preach on gambling. Can't preach on tobacco. What other sin should I preach on?" The elder didn't know what to say, so he thought about it for a moment. And then he came up with it. He said, "Well, you can speak on wicked people, because we have some of those in the next county." So tonight's topic is on sin, the very thing that people hate to face. The reason that people hate to face it is because it leaves people deformed and broken. And that's something we hate to be. Just as a potter takes clay and molds it into a sculpture, the Lord takes us broken and disformed and molds us into something great. We are the imperfect material being put into the hands of the master and being formed into something amazing. But even though we are being transformed, being changed, there's still something that can hold us back. Something that can bring us back to deformity, bring us back to being broken. That's sin. We need to be on the lookout for sin, because sin is very consistent in the destruction of our lives. Now, consistency intrigues me, because consistency is seen as something great. When you think of a worker, no boss likes a worker who does something good one day and then awful the next. They like a worker who's consistent. They do a good job day in, day out. Your mom, your dad. The reason they're so close to your heart, well, one of the reasons they're so close to your heart is they're consistent. Your father and your mother are always there. They're ready for any problem. Your wife, your husband, your best friend. They're consistently in your lives. That's what makes them so treasurable. But sin is not so good because it's always consistent. But it's consistently in the destruction of our lives. It's catastrophic in our lives. Sin is always consistent in three different ways. It'll always take you further than you wanted to go. There were once two African boys who went down to the Nile River and were looking for fish. They thought they'd feed their family, and they saw some ducks. Boy, did they want those ducks. They thought they'd be better meat than the fish, so they snuck up on them. And they were going to try to catch them, and what you'd expect, the ducks fluttered away. Didn't get any. But one boy had a plan. He had realized that logs would float down the river every single day, and they'd bump next to those ducks. So those ducks would think nothing of those logs. So he got some pumpkins, and he started floating them down the river. And when the ducks saw those pumpkins, they fluttered away. He did it the next day. The ducks saw the pumpkins, waited a second, then fluttered away. And he did this day by day by day, until suddenly those pumpkins became just like the logs. The ducks thought nothing of them. They would bump right next up to the ducks. And so him and his buddy, they hollowed out the pumpkins, put 2 eye holes in them, and they got down in the river. And they got to the neck level in the water where all you could see was the pumpkin. So they waded down the river. Once they got next to the ducks didn't flutter. They saw it as something they saw every day. And then right when they touched the duck, they grabbed them. They grabbed tons of ducks that day. Sin is the same way. Sin sneaks up on you little by little by little. And then suddenly, it's too late. Turn to 1 Corinthians 5, 5-8. Hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be served on the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole bunch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast, so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival, not with the old bread leavened with malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Sin is just like the yeast. A little bit of yeast, anybody who's made bread knows, makes the bread huge. The difference between unleavened bread and leavened bread is a big difference, but it's just a little bit of yeast. That's exactly how sin is. Just a little bit of sin might not seem like a lot in the moment, but then after a while, it's too late and it's huge. That's why you can't put a lot of yeast in dough. So we, like it says in the passage, we need to be the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. We need to be a people that have no yeast or no sin in our lives, because even just a little bit will be catastrophic. So sin, it'll always take you further than you wanted to go. And it'll always keep you longer than you wanted to stay. Now, when we realize that we've gone too far with sin, it makes us feel discouraged, broken, like there's no way out. One of the most known apostles is Paul. And Paul knew the emotions of sin. In Romans 7, Paul's pouring out his heart about how the things he does, he hates. The things he hates, he does. And he's just talking about the emotion, the depths of how sin feels in his heart. But he knows that there's no condemnation, as he says in chapter 8. But he still understands how the emotions can catch you when you're entangled in sin. Turn to Romans 7, 17-20. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living within me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin that is living within me. As we see, Paul is caught up in his emotions. He sees how bad it is in sin. But as Christians, we got to know that there's a way out. We've got to not be lethargic, not be inactive, because that's exactly what the devil wants. If the devil gets you to be lethargic and inactive in recovering from your sin, then you will be kept there way longer than you wanted to stay. But there, like I said, there is a way out. In Joshua 7, the Lord is telling Joshua his way out of sin. The people of Israel, their way out of sin. Turn to Joshua 7:10. It says, the Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I have commanded to them. They have taken some of the devoted things they have stolen. They have lied. They have put them in their own possessions. Skip down to verse 13. Go, consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. So we may be entangled with sin, but the way out is to repent, to obey God from then on. But the hardest part is we must eradicate the sin from our lives. Like earlier, you can't have the little bit of yeast to have unleavened bread. We can't have a little bit of sin. It's got to all be gone. So sin will always take you further than you wanted to go. It'll always keep you longer than you wanted to stay. And it'll always cost you more than you wanted to pay. When I think of sin, I think of the way an Eskimo kills a wolf. It's very intriguing to me because an Eskimo, it has a very weird tactic. He takes a knife, a razor-sharp knife, and he kills a seal. And he takes the blood of the seal and he dips it around the blade of the knife. And he lets it freeze. And then he dips the blade of the knife in the seal's blood again, lets it freeze. And he does this process over and over and over until the knife is just a handle and a thick layer of blood, frozen blood. And then in the middle is the blade. And so the Eskimo will stick it into the ice and wait. When a wolf comes by, they'll smell the blood and they'll lick the seal blood, the frozen seal blood, and they'll like it. And they'll keep licking it. And they'll lick it. And they'll taste the cold blood go down their throat. And then they get into a frenzy. Wolves eat in frenzies, and they just go crazy for it. So they'll lick, and they'll lick, and they'll lick. Until suddenly, it's not cold blood going down their throat. It's warm. Because they have gone through all the ice, the blood ice, and gotten to the knife. And so then, their frenzy is not on seal blood, but their own. Sin sends us into a frenzy to where we don't realize the extreme danger. It makes us not see how bad it is. Just like the wolf, when it licks the knife, thinks this is kind of good. We don't realize how sin can take us that far. We might think, oh, this isn't too bad. This is kind of fun. But really, we don't see the extreme danger until it's ourselves we're feeding on. Turn to Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. Surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. But your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden your face from him, so that he will not hear. The ultimate cost of sin is to separate us from God. Like in that passage how it says, your iniquities have separated you from the Lord. Even the little sins, even the ones that seem like no big deal, the ones that you see every day, the little lies, the little cheating, it separates us from God, which is the ultimate cost, which will make it cost more than we wanted to pay. So sin will take you further than you wanted to go. It'll keep you longer than you wanted to stay. And it'll cost you more than you wanted to pay. Satan will do anything to separate us from God. Satan's primary goal is to spite God. He hates him. So in this goal, the only thing he can actually hurt is us. So all he can do is try to tempt us and lead us away from God, because that hurts God. So his primary goal, he'll do anything to separate us from him. One of the greatest writers is C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis is read in many schools, many colleges, and many places around the world. But he wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters. And the Screwtape Letters is very interesting because it's from the perspective of a demon. And it's a demon speaking to another demon, giving advice on how to corrupt, how to hurt the lives of a Christian, how to bring them away from God. And in this book, it has a quote. You will say that these are very small sins, and doubtless, like all young tempters, you are anxious to be able to report spectacular wickedness. But do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effort is to edge the man away from the light. Murder is no better than cards, if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, the underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. The devil knows that it's the gradual sins that get to us Christians. So he's going to hit us where we're weak. He's going to hit us where we've been broken before. So we must despise sin. We must not flirt with it. It's really easy as a Christian to know that I shouldn't do that. So I'm going to do everything leading up to it, but not do it. Because technically I didn't do wrong. But if we flirt with sin, we're going to become entangled with it. So we got to build up our defenses. Build up our defenses. One of the most known battles is the Battle of the Alamo. And the Alamo had strong, big walls all the way around. But it had been broken before. There was one point where the walls had been broken. And so to defend the Alamo, they built makeshift walls called the Palisade Wall at one point. And the Spanish knew about this Palisade Wall. So they were going to attack with their best and their most forces at the Palisade Wall. Now the commander who was defending the Alamo knew this. And in confusion and not knowing what to do, he sent Davy Crockett and the Tennessee boys to defend the Palisade Wall. The reason he did this was because they were his best men. He knew that if they had any chance at defending the Alamo, it was with his best men at his weakest point. That's what we need to do. We need to find our Palisade Wall, the point where we've been broken before, and we need to build our best defense there. We must know, it's easy to not know our Palisade Wall or to ignore it. But we have to know it because that's where our biggest challenges will come. But we can find victory at our Palisade Wall. It might seem like it's been broken too many times, but we can find victory through God at our Palisade Wall. One of the greatest violin makers of all time is known as Stradivarius. Stradivarius was very poor, and he didn't have many materials to make violins. So in not having many materials, he was walking up and down the beach, and he saw driftwood. Now driftwood is not really good for anything. It's been waterlogged, it's been eaten by parasites, and it's just not good for really anything. It's been discarded by the world. But Stradivarius took it and built it into violins. A Stradivarius violin today is the most valued violin ever. Because, now, there were other factors in play, things that made it sound better, but it's because it was the hands of the master. It didn't matter if it was discarded. It didn't matter if it was not good wood. In the hands of the master, it was the most valued instrument. Now, God takes the driftwood, takes us, what's been discarded, what's seen as broken, and he turns us into something amazing. Because in the hands of the master, we are no longer useless like the driftwood, but we are turned into something that's priceless like the Stradivarian violin. So today, if sin has taken you further than you wanted to go, if it has kept you longer than you wanted to stay, if it has cost you more than you want to pay, you can find victory. You can find victory even at the place where you've fallen before, at your Palisade Wall. So if you need help with that tonight, come now as we stand and as we sing.